Hello and welcome to this quiet corner where curiosity can slowly wander, and science has all the time in the world to grow. Imagine yourself suspended in the hush of an evening room, the light dim and warm, the sound of the outside world reduced to a gentle hum. Now picture the ocean, vast, dark, and endless, stretching out beyond sight, its surface rippling like silk under moonlight. Beneath it, somewhere far below, lies a mystery that has teased human imagination for over 2,000 years. A place Plato once described in slow and deliberate detail as a mighty island civilization that thrived with palaces of gold and silver, grand temples, and an empire that ruled far beyond its shores. And then, one terrible day, vanished into the sea. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Tonight we're not staying in the present. We're going very far back. So far that even the world beneath our feet will seem unfamiliar. Now let's turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's enjoy tonight's journey. The earliest mention of Atlantis comes from Plato's dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE. You can almost imagine him sitting under the shaded colonnades of ancient Athens, retelling a story that, according to him, had been passed down from Egyptian priests to a Greek statesman named Solon, and then, finally, to his own teacher's family. It wasn't just a fable about hubris. It was, in Plato's words, a cautionary tale about power morality and the dangers of human arrogance. Atlantis, as he painted it, was more than just a city. It was an empire of concentric rings, 2 of land and 3 of water, connected by bridges bustling with ships and trade adorned with statues, gardens, and fountains. Imagine the scent of blossoms drifting through marble archways, the sound of hammering in distant shipyards, and the glitter of sunlight flashing off bronze armor as soldiers marched in perfect rows. But here's where the first riddle lies, was Plato describing history or allegory? Most modern scholars lean toward the latter, seeing it as a philosophical metaphor. Yet the story refuses to sink. Each century, fresh theories rise to the surface, some logical, some wild enough to make even the most open-minded archaeologist raise an eyebrow. One theory suggests Plato's Atlantis could have been inspired by real events, a distant memory of a thriving civilization that met a sudden and catastrophic end. After all, in the ancient world, stories traveled like driftwood on ocean currents, reshaped by each teller. What began as the account of a disaster might over generations have transformed into a legend of a perfect city swallowed by the sea. Here's a curious fact in ancient Greece. Atlantis literally means island of Atlas, tying it to the mythical Titan who held up the heavens. That link between gods and geography wasn't unusual for the time. Ancient people often mapped their myths directly onto their landscapes, as if the world's mountains, rivers, and islands were the footprints of giants and deities. And in this sense, Atlantis is the perfect blending of myth and memory, just believable enough to tempt explorers, just elusive enough to never be proven. If you were standing there in Plato's time, perhaps leaning on a sun-warmed stone wall as the agora buzzed with chatter, you'd notice that the idea of a lost city wasn't so far-fetched. Sailors returning from months at sea often spoke of strange lands where the air shimmered of coastlines swallowed by waves and of islands that seemed to vanish into mist. People knew the ocean could give, and the ocean could take away. The thought of such a city under the sea is oddly comforting, too. It's a reminder that the world is bigger and older than we can imagine. Somewhere down there, whether in the dark silt of the Mediterranean or the turquoise shallows of the Caribbean, might lie the scattered stones of a place that once rivaled any empire. And then there's the funny thing about Atlantis. For all the grand theories, there's no universal agreement on where to even start looking. Some say it's near the Azores. Others place it under Antarctic ice, which is the archaeological equivalent of saying it's in your other pair of pants. And while those ideas might sound absurd, they all share one trait: They refuse to let the legend die. As the waves roll on, you can feel yourself sinking into that same mindset. The sea holds so much we can't see. There's a reason we've explored more of the moon's surface than the ocean floor. It's not just depth or darkness, it's that water is a master at hiding secrets. Pressure crushes currents, shifts sands, and life reclaims even the grandest ruins. But for every lost city, every sunken temple, there's also the thrill of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, something emerges. An artifact washed ashore, a structure spotted by a diver, a sonar image hinting at straight lines where none should be. And that's where we'll be heading next, following the trail from Plato's words to one of history's most cataclysmic real-world events. The kind of event that could turn a thriving island into nothing but memory. The story begins to drift now away from Plato's scrolls and marble halls, and toward the deep blue waters of the Aegean sea waters that still hide a catastrophe so fierce it changed the course of civilizations. Picture yourself standing on the sun-bleached edge of an island in the Cyclades, the smell of salt and thyme in the air. To your right, jagged cliffs rise in hues of rust and ochre, the layered scars of ancient lava flows. To your left, the sea glitters innocently, hiding a memory of fire and ash. This is Thera, modern-day Santorini, a crescent-shaped remnant of what was once a complete island before the day the earth split open and the sea came rushing in. Around 1600 BCE, a massive volcanic eruption tore the island apart. It was one of the most violent eruptions in recorded human history, so powerful it may have been heard as far as Egypt and Anatolia. Imagine a column of ash and steam rising miles into the air, blotting out the sun, turning the day into a suffocating twilight. For the people living here, there was no warning siren, no seismograph to predict disaster. The first sign might have been the trembling underfoot, like the heartbeat of a restless giant. Then came the roar go, deep at first, building into a deafening bellow as the mountain exploded. Molten rock, superheated gases, and volcanic bombs rained down. Whole villages were swallowed in ash. And then came the tsunami. It's believed that waves as high as 30 meters swept across the Aegean, smashing into the palaces and harbors of the Minoan civilization on Crete, some 70 miles away. Ships were tossed like toys. Fields were flooded with salt water, rendering them useless for seasons. The Minoans, masters of trade and navigation, were dealt a blow from which they never fully recovered. This is where the first real-world parallel to Atlantis emerges. A thriving island civilization, rich, powerful, deeply connected to the sea, obliterated in a sudden catastrophic event. It's easy to imagine how survivors or neighboring traders might have retold the story, the details shifting with each telling. Over centuries, an island destroyed by a volcano could become an island swallowed by the ocean. A city with complex architecture and a far-reaching empire could evolve into a legend of a perfect society, punished by the gods. Here's an unusual fact. The eruption of Thera released more energy than the most powerful nuclear weapons ever created, by orders of magnitude. Some scientists compare its force to millions of atomic bombs going off at once. The sound waves alone would have been enough to rupture eardrums for miles. And yet in the quiet centuries that followed, the island itself became part of the background of Greek history, a shattered but enduring crescent on the map. Walking the narrow streets of modern Santorini, it's hard to picture the terror of that day. The whitewashed houses cling to the cliffs as if nothing could move them, their blue domes reflecting the sky like calm water. But just below the surface, in the buried ruins of Akrotiri, archaeologists have uncovered a city frozen in time. Pots still stand in kitchens. Wall paintings, frescoes of dolphins. Flowers and women gathering saffron remain vivid, untouched by sunlight for over 3 millennia. It's like stumbling into someone's house after they stepped out for a moment, only to find they never returned. Akrotiri is sometimes called the Pompeii of the Aegean, but it has one haunting difference. No human remains have ever been found in the ash. This suggests that unlike in Pompeii, the people of Thera had time to flee. Perhaps they saw the first signs of the eruption, the earthquakes, the strange behavior of animals, the sea withdrawing before the wave, and escaped in ships. If so, where did they go? And what stories did they carry with them to other shores? You can almost picture one of those survivors years later, sitting in a harbor tavern, telling the tale to anyone who'd listen. His hands trace the curves of the lost island. He speaks of the sky turning black, the air too hot to breathe, the sea rising like a wall. Someone hears it, repeats it, embellishes it. Generations later, a philosopher writes it down, and now we call it Atlantis. And while the connection between Thera and Atlantis remains speculative, it is tempting to see how myth might grow from memory. The human mind loves to turn disaster into meaning. A volcano is not just a volcano, it is divine punishment, or the wrath of the sea itself. Light-hearted moment here. If ancient storytellers were anything like modern humans, I imagine some listener interrupting mid-story with, "Wow, so you're saying your island literally blew up? That sounds made up." And the storyteller sighs. Yes, that's the point. It was blown up, but by then the legend was already taking root. Today, if you sail into Santorini's caldera, you're essentially floating above the heart of that ancient volcano. The cliffs rise around you like the walls of a colossal amphitheater, and the water below is hundreds of meters deep. Somewhere beneath that darkness lies the silent proof of nature's power and that might have been the seed for the most famous lost civilization of all time. And from here, the journey drifts toward another place where history slept beneath the waves for over 1,000 years, until divers stumbled upon colossal statues lying in the sand, as if waiting for their story to be told again. The water here is calmer, darker, and heavier, as if it knows the weight of what it holds. You drift now to the warm shallows of the Nile Delta, where the river once fanned out into dozens of channels, spilling its silt into the embrace of the Mediterranean. In antiquity, this was a place of life and commerce, a threshold where traders from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond came to meet Egypt's merchants, priests, and officials. Somewhere out there, beyond the modern fishing boats, once stood the twin port cities of Heracleion and Canopus. Today, they rest beneath 30 feet of water and layers of sand, their streets silent, except for the soft pull of the tide. But thousands of years ago, Heracleion was a bustling harbor, Egypt's primary gateway to the Mediterranean, before Alexandria rose to power. You might have walked through its grand gates under the watchful eyes of colossal statues, their stone surfaces gleaming in the sunlight. Temples rose high above the docks, their incense-scented halls filled with the murmured prayers of sailors seeking safe passage. Canopus, not far away, was famed for its healing temples and a certain rowdy reputation, think more coastal festival town than sober administrative center. The mystery, of course, is how they ended up down here. For centuries, their location was a mystery. Old maps mentioned them, ancient texts described them, but their exact whereabouts had been swallowed by the sea. It wasn't until the year 2000 that French marine archaeologist Franck Godiot and his team, scanning the seabed with sonar, stumbled across shapes that could not belong to nature. Stone walls, massive blocks, columns lying in perfect alignment. Imagine the moment divers first descended and their lights illuminated the face of a giant statue, its features serene despite centuries in darkness. These statues depicting gods, pharaohs, and priests were found half buried in sand, as if mid-procession, when the sea claimed them. Some are over 16 feet tall, weighing several tons, and yet here they lie, toppled, but not shattered, waiting for curious hands to brush them clean. The cause of their sinking is thought to be a combination of natural forces, earthquakes, flooding, and a phenomenon called liquefaction. In certain conditions, waterlogged soil can lose its solidity, behaving more like liquid than earth. Picture a stone temple sitting firmly on the ground one moment, then slowly sinking as the land beneath it turns to quicksand. Over time, storms and the Nile's shifting channels covered everything in sediment until the cities vanished entirely from human memory. Here's your unusual fact for the night among the finds in Heraklion was an enormous ceremonial barge dedicated to the god Amun, carved entirely from wood and over 60 feet long. It had been carefully dismantled before sinking, perhaps as part of a ritual. The wood was so well preserved in the oxygen-deprived seabed that divers could still see the tool marks left by ancient shipbuilders. You can picture how these places must have looked before their fall, brightly painted hieroglyphs running along temple walls, markets overflowing with baskets of grain, fish incense, and lapis lazuli beads from Afghanistan. The calls of merchants would have echoed across the docks, mingling with the splash of oars and the creak of ships. At night, oil lamps would have turned the streets into rivers of gold light. Then, over decades, the ground shifted, the waters crept in, and the cities were gone. This is where the link to Atlantis feels particularly strong, not in the details of rings of water or a mighty navy, but in the idea that a vibrant, world-connected city could simply disappear from the map. To an ancient storyteller, the fact that the sea swallowed the city was enough to make it mythical. And if you think about it, Heraklion's rediscovery proves something important. Sometimes legends aren't exaggerations, they're just waiting for the right century to be proven. One can almost imagine a weary sailor in ancient Greece returning from Egypt and saying, "I swear there used to be a whole city there," only to be met with skeptical laughter. In the absence of proof, memory turns into myth. And in the absence of witnesses, the ocean keeps its secrets. Light-hearted thought. Somewhere in another reality, there's probably an ancient Egyptian fisherman who's now famous for being the guy who misplaced 2 entire cities. That's a hard one to live down at the dockside tavern. Today, visiting the sunken ruins isn't like wandering through a museum. You're suspended in green-blue light, surrounded by the weight of centuries, moving through streets where the only inhabitants are schools of fish weaving between column drums. Your bubbles rise slowly to the surface, the only sound in a world that feels completely separate from the one above. And yet, as incredible as this discovery was, Heraklion and Canopus are just the beginning. The sea holds stranger shapes and older mysteries, some of them far from Egypt's gentle waters. Our next stop lies in the Pacific, where waves crash over an underwater staircase that may or may not be the work of human hands. The water feels different here, cooler, with a restless push and pull, as if the ocean itself is deciding whether to keep it secret or let you glimpse it. We're drifting now to the far western edge of the Pacific, near the Japanese island of Yonaguni. This is a place where clear turquoise shallows drop away into the inky depths of the East China Sea, and where in 1986, a local diver named Kihachiro Aratake swam over something that made him stop mid-kick. Below him was a massive stone formation, terraces, steps, and platforms, stacked with unnerving precision. The structure seemed too deliberate, too geometric to be a product of natural erosion. Imagine a staircase broad enough for a parade of giants or a pyramid, with tiers that step down into the sea. Sharp right angles cut into the rock-flat platforms stretch like plazas, and some areas even have what look like roads or avenues. To see it from above is to be struck by a strange sense of order amid the chaos of the seafloor. This discovery sparked an immediate and heated debate. Was the Yonaguni monument a man-made ruin from some unknown prehistoric culture, or was it simply the result of natural sandstone fracturing and weathering in a region prone to earthquakes? Geologists and archaeologists argued back and forth, each side, convinced the other was missing the obvious. Those who saw human craftsmanship pointed to what appeared to be carved steps, pillars, and a possible temple-like area. Skeptics countered that tectonic forces and wave erosion can produce eerily regular shapes given enough time. Here's your unusual fact for tonight. Yonaguni's waters are home to hammerhead sharks, and the best season for diving there is also the time when these sharks gather in large numbers. So while divers are squinting at the stone edges trying to decide whether they're looking at a city or a cliff, there's a good chance a curious shark is watching them back. If the monument is indeed man-made, it would mean that humans in the region had the ability to shape massive stone structures at least 10,000 years ago, long before the rise of Egypt Sumer or the Indus Valley civilizations. That would rewrite a chunk of human history, and you can see why some researchers are hesitant to leap to that conclusion without hard evidence, like tools pottery or other cultural artifacts. Yet even if nature is solely responsible, the site still captures the imagination. Swimming along the monument feels like gliding over the rooftops of an abandoned city, with coral clinging to the edges and fish darting through gaps like residents moving through shadowed alleys. The light from above shifts constantly, with the swell making straight lines bend and ripple until you're not quite sure what's real and what's an illusion. For believers in Atlantis and other lost civilizations, Yonaguni is tantalizing because it sits at the edge of a region rich in ancient myths. Some Japanese legends speak of lost lands swallowed by the sea, much like the Polynesian and Southeast Asian tales of vanished islands after great floods. Could this be a remnant of one of those, or is it simply a coincidence, a geological quirk dressed up in human imagination? The monument also invites a thought about how our minds work when we encounter patterns. Humans are wired to see order even where there might be none. Just as we see faces in clouds or animals in constellations, a diver might see a pyramid in a fractured cliff face. And sometimes maybe those patterns are real. The trouble is figuring out which is which. A lighthearted moment, imagine if in 10,000 years the sea covers all of our skyscrapers and alien archaeologists argue over whether the collapsed remains of a shopping mall were an intentional cultural site or just an oddly shaped rock formation. History loves to play this game with us. We just happen to be the current players. Whether it's a temple built by forgotten hands or a beautiful accident of nature, Yonaguni has claimed its place in the catalog of underwater mysteries. It stands as a reminder that the ocean can hold not only what we know, but also what we aren't yet ready to understand. And now the current pulls us onward again, this time toward waters where the shoreline itself has moved, swallowing entire communities. Beneath the gentle waves of the Black Sea, the ghosts of ancient villages still rest, marking a time when the world's oceans rose and redefined the map of human life. The water here is a softer blue, almost glassy, as if the surface is holding its breath. You're drifting now into the Black Sea, a place that has long been a crossroads between continents and cultures. Today, its waves lap gently against the coasts of Bulgaria, Turkey, and Ukraine. But thousands of years ago, this was a very different world. Imagine a broad, fertile plain, dotted with villages grazing herds and fields of barley swaying in the wind. Then something changed. Around 700 to 500 years ago, according to one theory, the Black Sea was not the vast inland sea we know today, but a much smaller freshwater lake cut off from the Mediterranean by a strip of land. The people who lived along its shores had no reason to suspect that their world was about to vanish beneath the waves. The trigger was far away in the melting ice caps at the end of the last ice age. As global temperatures rose, the oceans swelled, and the Mediterranean's water level crept higher and higher. Eventually, the sea breached the natural dam at the Bosporus Strait, possibly in a single catastrophic event. Imagine a wall of salt water roaring in faster than any river flood pouring into the Black Sea basin, with the force of dozens of Niagara Falls. For the people living there, the transformation would have been both terrifying and permanent. Villages, farmland, and sacred sites were swallowed, replaced by deepening blue. Families who had lived for generations on the same patch of earth suddenly became refugees, moving inland with only what they could carry. Some scientists believe this event could be the seed of flood legends, told in many cultures from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Noah's Ark. And here's an unusual fact. The waters of the Black Sea are mostly anoxic, that is, they lack oxygen below a certain depth. This means that organic material like wood rope and even shipwrecks can remain astonishingly well preserved for thousands of years. In 2018, researchers using deep-water drones found a Greek trading vessel more than 400 years old, lying nearly intact at the bottom. Its mast was still upright, its rudder in place, looking as though the crew had just stepped away. Beneath these waters, archaeologists have discovered the remnants of ancient shorelines, complete with stone tools, hearths, and wooden structures. Some of these sites now rest hundreds of feet below the surface, frozen in the moment they were abandoned. You can almost picture a fisherman tying his boat one evening, not knowing that the very dock he stood on would soon be gone forever. Light-hearted thought, if time travel ever becomes possible, we'll need to bring snorkels to half of history's most interesting sites. And maybe a raft. For those who see echoes of Atlantis in every lost settlement, the Black Sea discoveries carry a bittersweet message. The people who lived here weren't building golden palaces or commanding vast empires, but their world was no less rich in meaning. They farmed, fished, raised children, and told stories just like we do. And then nature redrew the map without asking their permission. This is the quiet truth of so many submerged worlds. The sea doesn't care about grandeur. Whether it swallows a small fishing hamlet or a glittering capital, its depths treat all human creations the same. And when the waters finally settle, only silence remains until centuries later, someone with sonar and patience comes looking. Now the tide pulls us farther east to a place where myth and archaeology meet once again. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Kambat, divers have reported structures so vast and old, they may rewrite the timeline of human civilization. The locals know the name well. It's Dwarka, the legendary city of the Sea Kings. The water here is warmer, carrying the scent of salt and distant monsoon rains. You're gliding now over the Gulf of Kambat, where the Arabian Sea presses against the coast of Gujarat in western India. The currents are strong, churning up silt from the seabed, and visibility can vanish in seconds. Yet in these turbulent waters, sonar scans and daring dives have revealed something remarkable, what appear to be the remnants of vast ancient structures stretching across several square kilometers. For centuries, stories of Dwarka have echoed through Indian tradition. In the Hindu epic Mahabharata, it is described as the opulent, many-gated city of Lord Krishna, a place of gold towers, grand avenues, and bustling harbors. According to legend, when Krishna left the earth, the sea rose up to claim Dwarka, swallowing it whole. To believers, the recent discoveries offshore feel like proof that the legend is rooted in history. The first hints came in the early 2000s, when the National Institute of Ocean Technology, NIOT, used sonar imaging to map the seabed. They found what seemed to be geometric patterns, rectangular formations, walls, and even possible street grids lying beneath 120 feet of water. Divers sent down to investigate reported large hewn stone blocks, some arranged in ways unlikely to be natural. Here's your unusual fact. Some of the artifacts recovered from the site, including pottery shards and tools, have been dated controversially to as far back as 9,000 years ago. If that's accurate, it would place the origins of this settlement long before the Indus Valley civilization, which until recently was considered one of the earliest in the region. The challenge, however, is proving the connection between the archaeological finds and the legendary city. Critics argue that the stone features could be natural rock formations shaped by currents and time. Supporters counter that the layout and artifacts suggest deliberate construction. It's the same debate we saw at Yonaguni Nature versus human hands, with the truth hidden under layers of silt and skepticism. If you were to swim here, you'd need to work with the sea's mood. One moment the water clears enough for you to glimpse a row of stones stretching into the gloom. The next, a cloud of sediment swirls up and hides everything. Schools of fish flicker in and out of sight like silver thoughts darting through the mind. The currents are so strong that divers must hold tight to their guide ropes, inching forward, as though exploring the surface of another planet. Light-hearted moment, given the number of ancient cities that legends say were swallowed by the sea. You have to wonder if ancient urban planners should have spent less time on gold plating and more on seawalls. Dwarka's story matters not just because it's potentially old, but because it reflects how myth and memory can survive for millennia. Oral traditions in India have preserved the tale of a magnificent city claimed by the ocean, passed from generation to generation without written records for much of its history. If the submerged ruins are indeed linked to that story, then Dwarka stands as an extraordinary example of cultural memory outlasting even geography itself. Whether it's Krishna's legendary capital or an unrelated ancient harbor, the site reminds us that the ocean is not just a destroyer, it is also a preserver. The silt and salt that hide a city also protect it from the erosion of wind and time. Somewhere down there, perhaps streets still run between silent walls, waiting for the daylight returns to them. From the warm tides of India, our journey now drifts northward toward a place where the sea did not so much swallow a city as an entire country. Beneath the cold, churning waters of the North Sea lies Doggerland, a lost land that once connected Britain to the continent, a vanished landscape of rivers, forests, and human life. The water here is cold gray and restless. You're now drifting above the North Sea, where the waves stretch unbroken between the British Isles and mainland Europe. Today, this expanse feels eternal, but not so long ago in the vast sweep of geological time, this was dry land, a sprawling region of rivers, lakes, and grassy plains known as Doggerland. Imagine walking from what is now the Netherlands straight into what is now England, without ever seeing the sea. Herds of red deer and wild horses graze in open meadows. Small groups of humans, Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, move through the landscape, carrying spears tipped with flint fishing along riverbanks and gathering berries from the edges of dense forests. The air smells of damp earth and pine, and the calls of waterfowl echo over marshes. Doggerland existed for thousands of years after the last ice age, a bridge of life between Britain and the continent. But as glaciers melted and sea levels rose, the North Sea crept in. Low-lying areas flooded first, creating wide estuaries and tidal marshes. Over centuries, the water advanced relentlessly, cutting channels where rivers once ran, transforming high ground into islands. Eventually, only a few isolated patches of dry land remained until one day, around 8,000 years ago, the sea closed over it entirely. Scientists believe the end came more suddenly for parts of Doggerland, possibly hastened by a catastrophic event, the Storegga Slide. Off the coast of Norway, a massive underwater landslide sent towering tsunamis surging across the North Sea, flooding coastal settlements and erasing entire landscapes. For the people living there, the change must have been unthinkable. The familiar paths to hunting grounds gone, replaced by a horizon of water. Here's your unusual fact: Doggerland isn't just known from sonar maps and geological studies. Fishing trawlers working the North Sea sometimes bring up artifacts from the seabed: stone tools, carved antler points, even fragments of human and animal bones. In a way, modern fishermen are like accidental archaeologists, hauling up pieces of a world that vanished before history began. The seabed still holds the outlines of rivers, lake beds, and hills. Using 3D mapping, researchers have been able to reconstruct parts of the ancient terrain in remarkable detail. You can trace the curve of a riverbank, or spot the gentle rise of a ridge that once provided a vantage point over a wide plain. Somewhere in those maps, perhaps, are the footprints of the last humans to see Doggerland's grasslands before they sank. Light-hearted thought. If ancient Doggerlanders could time travel here, they'd probably look at the choppy gray waters and say, well, this explains why we can't find our campsite. What's striking is that Doggerland's loss wasn't just a local tragedy. It reshaped human history. As the land bridge disappeared, Britain became an island, its people gradually becoming more distinct from their continental neighbors. Cultures evolved separately, trade routes shifted, and migrations changed direction. The drowning of Doggerland was in a sense the moment Britain began to drift not just geographically, but culturally. Today, the name lives on in the Dogger Bank, a shallow area of the North Sea that was once a high ridge in the heart of the lost landscape. When storms churn its sands, fragments of ancient life are still pulled free. Each find is a small reminder that the seafloor beneath us is not just barren mud, it's a cemetery of worlds. And so we leave the chill waters of the North Sea behind, heading toward the tropics. There, in the Bahamas, a line of stone blocks lies just beneath the surface, pointing toward deeper mysteries, and according to some, toward the path to Atlantis itself. The water turns warm again now, clear blue-green, and bright enough that the sunlight dances all the way down to the sand. You're drifting off the island of Bimini in the Bahamas, where the air smells faintly of salt and hibiscus, and the sea is the color of polished glass. Just beneath the surface, a strange sight appears, a long, almost perfectly straight line of rectangular stone blocks stretching for hundreds of feet. Divers call it the Bimini Road. It looks at first glance like the remains of a paved street or harbor wall, massive limestone slabs fitted together as if laid by ancient hands. The formation was discovered in 1968, which in a twist worthy of a conspiracy novel happened just 2 years after the famous psychic Edgar Cayce predicted that part of Atlantis would rise near Bimini in that decade. The coincidence was enough to ignite decades of speculation and debate. Those who believe in an Atlantean connection argue that the stones are too regular and aligned to be natural. They point to what appear to be right angles, evenly spaced joints, and flat surfaces that resemble man-made construction. Some even imagine this as a remnant of a breakwater or ceremonial causeway leading to a once great city, now swallowed by the sea. Skeptics counter that the Bimini Road is simply a case of etcher rock, a type of limestone that naturally fractures into blocky shapes as it erodes. Over time, waves and currents can align these slabs in surprisingly neat patterns, giving the illusion of deliberate engineering. Here's your unusual fact. In addition to the Bimini, road divers have found other roads and walls in the Bahamas that on closer inspection turned out to be entirely natural. Nature, it seems, is not above trolling human curiosity. Swimming along the Bimini Road is both eerie and oddly peaceful. Schools of tropical fish glide through the gaps between stones. Sunlight filters down in shifting patterns, so that one moment the blocks look sharp-edged and deliberate, and the next they blur into the randomness of nature. Coral has colonized many of the surfaces, softening whatever geometry once caught the eye. Light-hearted thought. If this is a road to Atlantis, it's not exactly commuter-friendly. You'd need scuba gear just to get to work. What makes the Bimini Road so compelling isn't just its mystery, but its location. The Bahamas sit near the edge of the submerged Bahama Banks, a vast underwater plateau. During the last ice age, when sea levels were lower, much of this area would have been dry land. It's not impossible to imagine that humans lived here building structures along what was then the coastline, only to see it all vanish beneath the rising seas. And that's the thread tying so many of these stories together. Even without Atlantis, the ocean has claimed countless places that were once home to people. Some were grand cities, others small fishing villages, but all now share the same fate, preserved in saltwater silence. From the calm, shallow waters of Bimini, the journey now turns toward deeper and darker seas. Off the coast of Cuba, in waters too deep for free diving, sonar scans have revealed something startling: massive stone shapes arranged in ways that look suspiciously like the streets of a forgotten city. The sunlit turquoise fades away, now replaced by a deep, almost velvety blue. You're off the western coast of Cuba, in a stretch of ocean where the seabed plunges dramatically. The water is so deep here, over 2,000 feet in places, that sunlight barely reaches, and the silence feels ancient. In 2001, a team of researchers scanning the sea floor for the Cuban government picked up something unexpected on their sonar shapes. Not random blobs or natural ridges, but large geometric formations. The images showed massive stone-like blocks, some arranged in long lines. others forming rectangular and circular patterns. Some appeared to be stacked or layered, as if part of walls or stepped structures. The site, roughly the size of a small city, lay far deeper than any known human settlement should be, from the last 10,000 years at least, according to conventional history. The discovery stirred immediate speculation. Could this be a remnant of a lost civilization sunk by some prehistoric cataclysm? The location only added fuel to the fire. It sits in the general region where some Atlantis theorists have long placed the fabled city. Here's your unusual fact. Geologists estimate that the site lies in an area that would have been dry land more than 50,000 years ago. That's long before most historians believe humans were building anything like monumental architecture. Which means if these structures are man-made, they would rewrite our understanding of when complex societies first emerged. Skeptics point out that without physical samples, it's impossible to say whether these formations are human-built or simply natural rock outcrops shaped by tectonic forces. And the depth makes further investigation extremely difficult. Sending divers down isn't feasible without specialized submersibles, and so far, expeditions have been limited. Still, the tantalizing sonar images remain grainy, ghostly outlines that suggest streets, plazas, and walls, now home only to deep-water fish and drifting clouds of plankton. Imagine descending in a submersible, its lights cutting through the darkness to reveal a massive stone block half buried in silt. Perhaps your beam catches the corner of what looks like a staircase, its steps worn smooth by time, leading upward to nowhere. Light-hearted thought. If there was a city here, the real estate listings must have been very persuasive. Ocean views, guaranteed forever. The site has inspired more than just Atlantis comparisons. Some researchers speculate it could be linked to a culture entirely unknown to history, one that lived during a period when sea levels were far lower and coastlines stretched much farther out. Others caution that without more evidence, it risks becoming yet another legend, without proof, like so many tales of sunken worlds. And yet it's hard not to be drawn to the mystery. The ocean is a master of secrecy, and when it decides to hide something, it can do so for tens of thousands of years, without leaving more than a whisper for us to follow. The Cuban formations remain one of those whispers loud enough to intrigue, faint enough to frustrate. From here, the current shifts east toward waters that were once fertile plains, where rivers meandered and people thrived. Today, that land lies beneath the Persian Gulf, but once it may have been the heart of an ancient human homeland. The water warms again, but this time it carries a faint haze, as if the sea remembers the rivers that once flowed here. You're now gliding above the Persian Gulf, a stretch of water hemmed in by the coasts of modern-day Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Today, it's a shallow arm of the Arabian Sea, but rewind the clock about 12,000 years, and this was not a gulf at all. It was a vast, low-lying plain. Picture an immense green basin fed by four great rivers, the Tigris, Euphrates, Karun, and Wadi Batin. They wound their way across fertile ground, merging into a single waterway that flowed southeast toward what is now the Strait of Hormuz. Along their banks, early humans hunted gazelle, fished in winding streams, and gathered wild grains. The air was heavy with the scent of reeds, and flocks of birds rose in clouds from the wetlands. This region, often called the Gulf Oasis by archaeologists, may have been a cradle of early civilization. As the last ice age ended, melting ice sheets raised sea levels worldwide. The ocean crept inland slowly, turning lakes into bays, forests into shallows, and villages into seabed. Over several thousand years, the plain became a lagoon, then an inlet, and finally the saltwater gulf we know today. Here's your unusual fact. Some researchers believe that the Gulf Oasis may have supported human communities for more than 75,000 years before it disappeared. If true, that would make it one of the longest continuously inhabited regions in prehistory, and one of the most significant archaeological sites now lost beneath the waves. Evidence for this submerged world comes from several clues. Geological studies reveal ancient river channels carved into the seabed. Sediment cores contain pollen from plants that could only have grown on dry land. And along the Gulf's modern coasts, archaeological sites show a pattern of retreat as settlements moved uphill over millennia to escape the advancing water. Imagine the slow-motion tragedy for the people who lived here. Unlike the sudden calamities of Thera or Doggerland, the flooding of the Gulf oasis would have been gradual, perhaps just a few feet of shoreline lost in a lifetime. Each generation might have told their children the sea used to be farther away. Over centuries, their descendants would speak of lost hunting grounds and villages that lay somewhere out in the water beyond reach. Light-hearted thought, if the people of the Gulf oasis had beachfront property, it was definitely a buyer's market right up until the ocean decided to move in permanently. For those who see Atlantis in every drowned land, the Gulf oasis offers a fascinating parallel. It was fertile, connected to major rivers, and strategically placed for trade and migration. A story of its loss could easily have traveled far, eventually morphing into a legend of a vanished paradise. And because the flooding happened over such a long period, its memory could have been preserved in myth long after the last dry ridge sank beneath the tide. Today, the Persian Gulf is busy with shipping lanes and oil platforms, but far below the hulls of tankers and fishing boats lies an entire chapter of human history we may never fully recover. Without large-scale underwater excavations, the Gulf oasis remains mostly invisible, its rivers now traced only by the shifting shadows of currents. From these shallow, sunlit waters, the journey now moves back into deeper time, when coastlines around the world were entirely different, and the melting of the Ice Age submerged countless settlements along what are now as continental shelves. The current slows, and you drift into a time when the map of the world would be unrecognizable to us. It's the tail end of the last Ice Age, roughly 20,000 years ago. The oceans are hundreds of feet lower than today, locked away in vast ice sheets that cover much of North America, Europe, and Asia. The coastlines we know now don't exist. Shorelines stretch far out beyond today's beaches, and the continental shelves are wide plains where rivers meander and humans roam. If you could stand there at the edge of what is now the continental shelf, you'd be far from the water. The air would be sharper, cooler, and the land rich with game mammoths, giant sloths, and wild horses grazing in open grasslands. Human settlements clustered along rivers and bays that are now far beneath the waves. When the ice began to melt, the sea returned slow at first, then faster. The rising waters drowned those ancient coastlines, swallowing villages, hunting camps, and sacred sites. It happened on every continent, in every ocean basin. What we think of as prime coastal property today was already prime real estate back then, and people lived there for the same reasons we do now: easy access to food transportation and trade. Here's your unusual fact. Archaeologists estimate that nearly 20 million square kilometers of land have been lost to the sea since the last ice age, an area roughly the size of South America. And with that land went an untold number of human stories, most of which will remain forever hidden. Today, hints of these submerged worlds surface in scattered finds. Off the coast of Florida, divers have found prehistoric tools and the remains of ancient fires in what's now 20 feet of water. In the North Sea, fishing nets pull up carved antler points from Mesolithic hunters. Off Australia, sonar scans have revealed ancient river channels and stone fish traps now lying far below the surface. One of the most striking examples is off the coast of India's Tamil Nadu, where sonar has mapped what may be the outlines of a large ancient settlement near modern-day Mahabalipuram. Local legends speak of 7 pagodas, 6 of which were swallowed by the sea, a story that eerily mirrors the visible ruins divers have reported finding just offshore. Light-hearted thought, if we could drain the oceans for just 1 week, archaeologists would probably work themselves into exhaustion before reluctantly letting the water back in. The loss of Ice Age coastlines means our understanding of early human history is skewed toward inland sites. The real story, The one about the communities who thrived along ancient shores, traded over long distances, and perhaps built structures we wouldn't expect from that era, is hidden under layers of silt coral and salt water. And while these sites may not all be Atlantis in the grand gold and marble sense together, they form something even more compelling proof that the sea has been erasing and rewriting our history since long before the first written word. Each submerged shoreline is a reminder that human civilization isn't as permanent as we like to think. From these global coastlines, we now sail into the heart of myth again, toward a name whispered in old maps and esoteric books, Lemuria. A place that, like Atlantis, straddles the line between science and story, somewhere in the vast expanse of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The ocean grows wide and empty here, stretching toward horizons that feel infinite. You're somewhere between the Indian and Pacific Oceans, in waters that have carried both the whispers of myth and the weight of scientific debate. This is the realm of Lemuria, a lost continent imagined not from ancient scrolls, but from the pages of 19th century science. The idea began, oddly enough, with lemurs. In the mid-1800s, zoologists puzzled over how these animals were found in both Madagascar and India, but nowhere in between. Before plate tectonics was understood, one theory suggested that these regions were once connected by a now-vanished landmass. This hypothetical bridge, stretching across the Indian Ocean, was dubbed Lemuria. Soon the concept escaped the boundaries of zoology and wandered into the world of spiritualism and esoteric lore. Writers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries transformed Lemuria from a biological hypothesis into a mythical civilization. In these accounts, Lemurians were portrayed as an advanced, peaceful people, sometimes giants, sometimes highly spiritual beings, who eventually met their end when their homeland sank beneath the sea. Here's your unusual fact: even though modern geology has completely dismissed the idea of Lemuria as a single lost continent, the name still lives on not just in books and legends, but in the actual Lemurian rock formations in California, New Age healing crystals, and even resort names across the Pacific. For those who want to find some truth behind the myth, there's a more grounded possibility. The regions once imagined as Lemuria do hide fragments of lost worlds. Microcontinents like Zealandia near New Zealand, or the Kerguelen Plateau in the southern Indian Ocean, which was above water millions of years ago. And scattered across the Indian and Pacific Oceans are countless submerged volcanic islands, atolls, and seamounts, many of which might once have been larger land masses, where humans could have lived during lower sea levels. Sailing mentally through these waters, you can imagine what such a place would have been like. A chain of lush islands, connected by shallow reefs and lagoons, home to early seafarers who knew how to ride the monsoon winds. Their homes built from timber and palm, their stories told by firelight, their canoes, slipping silently across starlit bays. Over generations, the sea might have claimed island after island, until only memory remained, eventually reshaped into a legend of a whole continent lost. Light-hearted thought, if Lemuria ever did exist, the locals must be shaking their heads in the afterlife at all the strange crystal shops and tourist brochures claiming to channel their wisdom. Even though the scientific case for Lemuria, as originally imagined, has faded, its legend persists because it fills a familiar human longing. The desire to believe that somewhere in the unreachable past there was a place where life was better, wiser, or more harmonious than today. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. The names change, but the yearning stays the same. Now, with myths and mysteries mingling in our wake, it's time to surface into the present, where modern science, with its sonar satellites and deep-diving robots, is beginning to answer the questions these legends left behind. The ocean feels less like an untouchable mystery now, and more like a vast patient puzzle. You're in the age of modern exploration, where myths meet machines. Satellites scan coastlines from orbit sonar pings through the darkness, and remotely operated vehicles ROVs glide over the seabed with high-definition cameras. What once took centuries of rumor to piece together can now be mapped in hours. Consider the Mediterranean. Multi-beam sonar has revealed ancient harbors off Israel's coast, still shaped like horseshoes, to break the waves. In Greece, divers have found entire streets from the submerged city of Pavlopetri, perfectly preserved layouts of stone houses, courtyards, and roads, over 5,000 years old. These are not legends. They are real, tangible, and datable. Even in deeper waters, technology is prying open secrets. In 2018, a multinational team mapped a vast section of the Black Sea using deep-water drones to record dozens of shipwrecks spanning centuries. Some were so intact that the carvings on their hulls were still visible. And because of the oxygen-poor water, they looked as though they could sail again, if only they were lifted from the depths. Here's your unusual fact: NASA satellites designed for studying space are also used to detect submerged structures on Earth. By analyzing how sunlight reflects off shallow water, researchers can spot the faint outlines of ancient walls, roads, or even fields now lying under lakes and coastal shallows. These tools don't just locate ruins. They challenge our understanding of human history. Discoveries in places like the Gulf of Pavlopetri and Doggerland suggest that complex societies existed earlier and in more locations than previously thought. If the ocean has taken so much from us, what else might it still be hiding? Light-hearted thought: somewhere in the archives of the future, there will be side-by-side images of Atlantis sonar scans, and turns out, it's just a pile of rocks, and both will still be argued over at dinner tables. Modern science is also reframing the legends. Instead of dismissing them outright, researchers now ask whether myths like Atlantis or Lemuria might be distorted. Memories of real events, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, or the slow drowning of fertile lands. Technology allows us to test these possibilities in ways that would have been impossible just a generation ago. But there's also a poetic side to this work. The same ocean that swallows our history also preserves it in the cold, dark silence, where wood doesn't rot and stone doesn't crumble. Every time a camera drifts across a carved block or a mosaic floor, you feel the presence of lives, once lived voices that spoke, hands that built hearts, that dreamed of permanence. Now, with a century's worth of clues gathered from across the globe, it's time to circle back. We've crossed from Plato's words to volcanic islands, from drowned plains to mythic continents. The question remains, could Atlantis, in some form, have been real? The tide of the story returns now to where it began, with Atlantis, that shimmering city of legend. You've followed the currents through volcanic ruins, drowned plains, and myths stretched across oceans. And now the question waits like a half-buried statue. Could any of it, have been the place Plato described? Plato's account was precise in some ways, vague in others. He spoke of an island empire beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which most scholars interpret as the Strait of Gibraltar. Its lands were rich in metals, its people skilled in navigation and war. And yet in a single day and night of misfortune, it vanished beneath the sea. Some theories point to real events that might have inspired the tale: the eruption of Thera, the flooding of Doggerland, the collapse of Mediterranean port cities. Each fits parts of the puzzle, but leaves gaps elsewhere. Thera's destruction mirrors the suddenness of Atlantis's fall, but it lies within the Pillars of Heracles, not beyond. Doggerland fits the lost land theme, but lacks the grandeur of Plato's description. And places like Herakleion and Dwarka prove that great cities can indeed be swallowed by water, but their timelines don't align with his dates. Here's your unusual fact: Plato set the destruction of Atlantis at around 9,000 years before his own time, about 11,600 years ago. Intriguingly, that date coincides roughly with the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose rapidly, flooding coastlines worldwide. Some see this as coincidence, others as a clue. It's possible, even likely, that Atlantis is not one real place, but a tapestry woven from many stories of disaster. Sailors and traders would have carried tales of drowned lands across cultures, each retelling borrowing details from the last, until an amalgam of memories became a single gleaming myth. In that sense, Atlantis could be the symbolic sum of every city, village, and plain the ocean has claimed. Light-hearted thought. If all the Atlantises we've imagined over the years were put together, we'd probably have enough cities to fill an entire planet, most of them with suspiciously perfect weather and no mosquitoes. Still, even as science explains more and more, Atlantis refuses to dissolve entirely. The name has a pull that raw data can't erase. It represents possibility, a reminder that there may still be great discoveries hidden just beyond our reach. That somewhere, perhaps under miles of water or layers of silt, there could be ruins that would change our understanding of history in an instant. And maybe that's the enduring power of Atlantis. It lives in the space between certainty and wonder. It keeps us looking, diving, mapping, scanning, because we can't quite shake the feeling that the ocean hasn't told us all its secrets. Our journey is almost over now, but before we leave the depths, there's one last image to visit, a final quiet scene of what it means for the sea to embrace a civilization and hold it softly for eternity. The water is calm here, with only the faintest ripples touching the surface. You're floating over a place where the sea has done its work so completely that it feels less like a grave and more like a cradle. Below, outlines of walls lie half buried in sand, their edges softened by centuries of currents. Coral has claimed the stone, weaving it into a living tapestry of reds, golds, and pale blues. Fish drift lazily through open doorways. The ruins are silent, but they do not feel abandoned. It's in moments like this that you realize the ocean isn't only a destroyer, it's a keeper. It erases the clamor of human life, but it also preserves the bones of it, holding them in stillness until someone comes looking. Every stone below is part of a story that once unfolded in the sunlight, now told in whispers through water. From above, the scene could be anywhere. Perhaps this was once a market square where traders called out the day's prices. Perhaps those worn steps led to a temple where prayers rose with the smoke of incense. Now it's all part of the rhythm of the reef waves moving overhead, the hush of the tide, like the slow turning of pages in a book that can't be fully read. Here's your unusual fact. The oldest known underwater ruin, Pavlopetri in Greece, is at least 5,000 years old and still has a street plan you can follow. The ocean may claim our cities, but sometimes it leaves us enough to remember their names. Light-hearted thought, somewhere in the deep, there's probably a very confused octopus living in what used to be someone's bedroom, wondering why the layout feels so human. The sea's final embrace is not cruel, it's absolute. The same force that drowns also shields, tucking away the work of countless hands, in a place where time moves differently. And when those stories return to us through the beam of a diver's light, or the pixel of a sonar scan, they arrive not as ghosts, but as pieces of the human past we thought we had lost forever. Now the light fades, the water cools, the surface drifts farther away as the image of the ruins blurs into shadow. In that soft darkness, the line between history and legend becomes less important. Whether Atlantis was real or not, the truth is that the ocean is full of lost worlds, each with its own beauty, tragedy, and mystery. The current slows. The search ends here for now. The sea keeps the rest. And so we drift upward, away from the stones, away from the silence, toward the shimmer of the surface. The water grows lighter with each foot until the blue above is almost white. You break through into the night air. The ocean spreads out in every direction, calm and infinite, under a sky littered with stars. Breathe in. The salt on the air is cool. The breeze is steady. Somewhere behind you, the ruins rest exactly as you left them, untouched by anything but the tide. In this stillness, it's easy to see why these stories endure. Atlantis, Lemuria, Dwarka, Doggerland, they remind us that the world has always been in motion, that shorelines are temporary, and human history is more fragile than we like to believe, that even the greatest works of our hands can one day be folded gently into the sea. The waves move with a rhythm older than us, older than cities, older than memory. They will still be here tomorrow and the day after, carrying their hidden cargo of lost worlds beneath. Let your eyes close now. Picture the slow sway of seaweed in an underwater current, the glint of fish scales catching the dim light, the quiet of a place where time has stopped. The ocean is patient. It can wait forever. And as you rest, maybe you'll dream of walking along the streets of one of those cities, barefoot on cool stone, hearing voices that have been silent for thousands of years. Maybe you'll see the towers, the harbors, the open plazas. And maybe when you wake, you'll carry just a fragment of that world back with you. Good night. The sea will keep the rest.